Welcome, everyone. I'd like to introduce the chairman of the York County Historical Committee, Mr. Chris Molenkamp, to welcome all of you here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the York County Historic Committee, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to honor and celebrate the men and women who serve our country, our veterans, for those who currently serve, for those who've served in the past, for those who have chosen to serve, and those that were called by the country to serve. Thank you for being here to honor, to recognize, and celebrate them. And even more importantly, to those of you who have served and are currently serving, thank you for your service to our country.
As we've done in past years, we're doing a thing about humanizing the war for those that fought, the veterans. And so we're going to do some stories from the time period, and the stories were told by different veterans over different time periods. And one of the stories I was told by a Navy veteran, a World War II Navy veteran that I met at a Denny's, of all places, and he said he was by himself, and he said he saw me wearing something with a military insignia on, and he asked if I was in the service. I said, "No, sir, I'm not." He said, "Well, I was. Would you like to hear a story?" And here's the story. He was a U-boat, not on a U-boat, he was on an American submarine in the Pacific. And when they started or launched a new submarine in Connecticut, they would take half the crew off of one of the active submarines, American submarines, and post it to the new sub. So each sub would have a half of a new crew and a half of an old crew, which made sense. So you had people training them. When he got to Connecticut, the war ended, and a German U-boat offshore surrendered. So their crew, that American crew, half the crew were sent out to help bring the U-boat in. So when they got out there, they were looking at the controls. He said, my XO was looking at the controls on the sub, and he couldn't make head nor tails of it because it was all in German. So the German officer, the commander of the sub, looked at him. He said, would you like me to take the sub in? And he said, can you? He said, yeah, we've been in there before. So that was the eye-opener on how close in the coast the U-boats have been coming. He said he took that U-boat right up and past all the American sub catches and nets to keep them out of the river and placed it at their dock. So that's our first story. At this time, I would like to have our posting of our colors. VFW at Post 824 will be posting the colors, and York High School's NJROTC will be posting our service flags. Please stand. Please repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. Face. Forward. Mark.
Everyone, please be seated. As you can see, it takes a lot of entities to put on a ceremony like this. We'll be recognizing everyone at the end. But right now, I'd like to ask everyone that's either active duty or had been in the armed forces, please raise your hand. We'll be recognizing you again in a little while. Thank you. One of the other stories I've read two accounts of is a local story at Ship Point, which is in the Dare section of York County. Was home to a Confederate outpost at the beginning of the American Civil War. They started fortifying the works because they looked out on the opening of the Pocosin River, put in 10 artillery pieces, and kind of got the local guys together, which weren't trained troops, they were militia. So there was a family down there at the time that had a farm, and one of the soldiers was going over and liberating some of the corn out of the cornfield without permission. So the woman, the family, saw him taking the corn and chased him back to camp. Well, the fellow had a beard, and he ran into the cabin. They had log huts because of some letters Bonnie Carwick's family had. We knew they had log huts, so they had pretty decent quarters. He ran into the quarters and took a butcher knife, which is the only thing he could find, and cut his beard off because he knew they would be doing a lineup to recognize who had stolen the corn. So they put everybody in a lineup, and the captain in command at that time, I believe Frank Lee might have been there, had him line up and had the lady go through to identify the culprit. So she went through, and because he'd cut his beard off, she could not pick him out. So finally she gave up and walked away, and the captain walked over and looked at him. He said, "It was you, wasn't it?" He said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "That's as close a shave as I ever want to see in more than one way." At this time, we'd like to recognize our guest. We've got up front, Dane always helps us out with the sounding of the bell. He's been coming, he's also a veteran, coming each year. We have Bill Townsley, who's also with the VFW and the DAV, right? With both organizations. We'll be doing a little talk towards the end of our program. We have Chris Molenkamp that you met earlier. He's our chairman for the York County Historical Committee. And we have Kirby Taylor Smith, who will be our guest speaker. And I'll introduce him in just a little while. We also have Sheila Knoll I saw come in. Sheila, raise your hand. And any other supervisors? I did get a note from George. He was at a funeral today, wouldn't be able to be here. Anyway, thank all of you for coming out. There's another story that hits close to home. It was in another country. But the men from the York County Pocosin area were, at the beginning of the war, that were drafted were put all in the same company. And it was Company G, 318th Infantry, 80th Division. So they arrived in France to fight in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Well, these local boys, who were mostly watermen and farmers, they had adopted a burro as a mascot, as a pet. And Sam Jones Freeman from Pocosin tells the story about, and this was given to me secondhand because I didn't know him, but I knew a fellow that did know him. Sam Jones, they started getting barraged by German artillery, and it got bad. They were down in the trenches hunkering down, and the burro was loose running around up above them. They could not get the burro to go down the trench. And they said that, the cannons got worse. He said, all we could think about was that burro. He said, well, what I was thinking about is if the burro decides to get in the trench on top of us, something would happen. And he said it got so bad, finally Sam Jones Freeman piped up and said, he said, if this gets any worse, he said, I'm going to put a saddle on that burro and ride her clean back to Bull Island. So, at this time, I'd like to introduce our Veterans Day speaker. I have a pretty good biography on him. I've known him a while. Taylor has helped us out on numerous programs, from raising money for the monument out front when he was a teenager, to firing on the firing details, to playing taps over the years. And so now I roped him in to being the speaker because he's a historian. That's what he does for a living. He's also in the U.S. Army Reserve. He's a captain and is a park ranger with Jamestown National Park. So he's here on behalf of the park. And I'm going to turn it over to you. So see, when you're the dad, you can still pull those things in.
All right, thank you all. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to speak today. We're here to honor our veterans and remember their achievements, their courage, and their dedication, and thank you for their sacrifices. Thinking of those who join us in this group today and those who are here only in spirit, a person can't help but feel awed by the enormity of what we encounter and their memories that surface with stories long forgotten. We stand in the midst of patriots and the family and friends of those who have served nobly, and what better place to stand than here in Yorktown. So what exactly is a veteran? I had this discussion with my 7-year-old just last week as his curiosity was piqued. According to the federal definition, a veteran is any person who served honorably on active duty in the armed forces of the United States. But we all know that it means more than that. A veteran is also a person who has long experience in a particular field, in this case, the military. The service members we honor today came from all walks of life, but they share several fundamental qualities, qualities that resonate over hundreds of years with America's veterans. They possess courage, pride, determination, selflessness, dedication to duty, and integrity, all the qualities needed to serve a cause larger than oneself. Many of them didn't ask to leave their homes to fight on distant battlefields. Some didn't even volunteer. They didn't go to war because they loved fighting. They were called to be a part of something much bigger than themselves. They're ordinary people who responded in extraordinary ways in extreme times. They rose to the nation's call because they wanted to protect the nation which has given them so much. As a park ranger, historian, veteran, and local Virginian here at the Colonial National Historical Park, I have the honor of telling the story of many veterans from 1607 all the way up to 1865 and beyond, and their roles at Jamestown, Yorktown, and other locations throughout this area of Virginia. Today, I'd like to talk about a specific group of veterans who played a major role here in Virginia in 1781. Their sacrifice and stories are often forgotten or overshadowed by other events during the Yorktown campaign of the American War for Independence. That group of veterans is referred to often as the Virginia Grenadiers, a battalion of hand-picked veteran Virginia militia formed by Lieutenant Colonel John Mercer. Mercer was an officer and a Virginian who, by 1781, had already seen combat at the Battle of Brandywine, where he'd been wounded, and would eventually resign from Continental service almost after 3 years in July of 1779. A little over a year after he returned home, in October 1780, he would once again take up arms to serve Virginia against the threat of invasion by British forces. By 1781, Virginia's Continental Line had suffered so significantly from previous campaigns that it could hardly muster a couple of hundred men on any given day. The majority of the Virginia line had been captured in May of 1780 in Charleston, South Carolina, and the state was scrambling to fill its ranks yet again. In the late summer and early fall of 1781, Virginia militia forces recently called up to serve began to arrive at Ware Church, near Gloucester County Courthouse across the river. General George Wheaton, a Continental officer, was assigned as brigade commander to the group of militia forming around the church and was given strict orders by General Washington to cut off and besiege the British forces garrisoned across the river at Gloucester Point, only a short distance away from the bulk of General Lord Cornwallis's army here at Yorktown. Just what sort of men were answering Virginia's call by 1781? Were they scraping the bottom of the barrel trying to defend her shores? Not exactly. Men like Charles Bettesworth, a resident of King George, were shining examples of the type of men showing up near Gloucester Courthouse, answering the state's call on August 1st. He had seen numerous terms of service, both in the Continentals and the militia, since 1777. He was a combat veteran of the Battle of Monmouth in 1778 and had chased British forces away from Virginia shores on previous occasions while in militia service. His experience was recognized and valued by leaders like Wheaton and Mercer. Bettesworth was just the type of man they were seeking to fill the ranks of the militia grenadiers in Gloucester. Colonel Mercer had his task set before him, and he wrote a letter to a fellow officer that, agreeably to General Wheaton's order, I had selected from the militia such old soldiers as I could find, who, having retired from the Army after expiration of their term of service, were now performing their tours of duty with the militia as other citizens. To these, I added the most likely young men that volunteered their services, and such young gentlemen as officer as appeared most promising. Of such materials, I collected a corps consisting of 200 rank and rifle. As a distinction that appeared best calculated to create an esprit de corps, they were termed the Grenadier Regiment. Little did Mercer know this core group of Virginia veterans would play a crucial role on the north side of the York River in the coming weeks. As the militia gathered, organized, and equipped themselves, a small force of French soldiers, Marines, and cavalry arrived to bolster their numbers to face off with Lieutenant Colonel Tarleton and the British forces at Gloucester Point. Tarleton had under his command some of the most experienced and tenacious soldiers and cavalry in the British Army serving in North America in 1781. His British Legion, Lieutenant Colonel Simcoe's Queen Rangers, and the 23rd Regiment of Foot, also known as the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, were hardened veterans of many campaigns themselves, some of whom had been serving since 1775 in and around Boston and in North America. Tarleton's force spent most of September raiding and foraging throughout the Gloucester countryside and the Middle Peninsula region in order to feed the men and horses garrisoned on the north side of the York River. His aim was also to keep open the northern avenue of escape should the British here at Yorktown require its use later. It was on October 3rd, on one of those foraging expeditions, that things would take a turn for the worse for Tarleton and his men. They went out on a foraging expedition out towards Swell's Ordinary, and that morning by 10 a.m. they completed their foraging. As they're making their way back, there was a force of French cavalry that happened upon them. Tarleton turned to try to meet them. In the process of the British cavalry engaging with them, Tarleton was knocked off of his horse. And the men who were behind the line decided to move forward. They saw Tarleton fall off of his horse. They thought that he'd been wounded and possibly killed. So the other men that are part of Tarleton's forces, they surged forward, very disorganized, trying to rescue him. In the process, there's a lull in the fighting. The French pull back. And taking advantage of the situation, the men who arrive on the field and take control of the action are the Virginia Grenadiers, of roughly 200 men. At this point, they had moved almost a mile running. If any of you have ever worn 18th century buckle shoes, you'll know that just walking in them is hard enough. But they managed to run almost a mile to catch up to the action. They arrived on the field. They delivered such a devastating fire against the British forces that day that Tarleton realized that things had just turned for the worse. And by doing that, Tarleton was able to escape, make his way back to Gloucester to the garrison, and stay behind those lines for the remainder of the time that they're there, all the way up until the surrender on October 19th. So by doing that, those 200 Virginians, that group of Virginia Grenadiers, those veterans of previous terms of service, were able to cut off the escape route for Lord Cornwallis, essentially bottling him up here at Yorktown. So that group of 200 men played a pretty big role here at Yorktown, but they're often overshadowed the things they do. And they weren't unique. The Virginia Grenadiers in 1781, they may have been a shining example of what the militia forces throughout the former 13 colonies had become after almost 6 years of bloody war. A hardened group of experienced veterans willing to do anything to protect and defend their homes and families, no matter the cost. Today, people throughout the country will gather together to remember, to honor, and to pay gratitude to those who have served our country. Our gathering is but one small spark in the flame of pride that burns across the nation today and every day. It's not a lot, but it is one small way we can honor those who have made the ultimate sacrifice so that we can live in freedom. Your presence here today and that of the people gathering all across America is a tribute to those lost service members and to their families. It is a way to say we remember, from the soldiers who shivered and starved throughout the winter at Valley Forge, to the doughboys crouched in the muddy trenches of France, to the platoon who patrolled the hazy jungles of Vietnam, and the young men and women patrolling the mountains and valleys of Afghanistan. We remember and honor them all. Thank you all very much for attending today and honoring our service members, both past and present.
Thank you. I'll make sure we get you a pizza for coming. Yeah, I owe you one. Thank you. I'd like to follow up with another story. Also, if you get up to Jamestown National Park during the week, you might be able to catch him on the tour. They have a lot of excellent rangers both there and here at Yorktown National Park, and I always enjoy getting to see those folks out and getting their tours. The next story we have is Cuba. Spanish-American War, 1898, and it's a little-known war. It's a little-known conflict, but one of the things most people don't know about it is when they decided that we were going to fight the Spanish in Cuba, we had to move supplies. The federal government realized, the American government, that they had to move supplies through the South. The Civil War had not been that too far back, so in order to do that, they realized they probably needed to appoint some people to help soothe the South. The South was still hurting. So they took some former Confederate officers, and they became officers in the American service. And one of them was a fellow named Joe Wheeler. He was a cavalry captain in the Confederate Army, and they gave him William McKinley, President McKinley, commissioned him as a general in the American Army. So Joe Wheeler goes down to Santiago. He's an older man by now. He's been, I think, he's in his 60s, and is commissioned as a general, and he's attached as a brigade commander under. I can't remember the officer's name, under an officer, but the Rough Riders are part of the unit he's in, part of the division he's in. And when he gets down there, he's told not to attack, not to do anything outwardly, just you go do kind of the status quo thing. Well, he saw an opportunity. The Cuban or Spanish troops were pushing. The Cuban troops, who were the allies of the American troops, weren't aggressive enough, and he saw an opportunity maybe to throw the Spanish troops back. So he ordered his troops to attack and pushed the Spanish back to Santiago. But as the Spanish troops started running, he got excited and said, "We got those damn Yankees on the run again." Different war. That's one of the things that came out of the Spanish-American War time period. The next thing we're going to do is we'd like to recognize all of our veterans, and we're going to have music play We're going to have our ROTC cadets come, 3 in the center and 2 in each end, and come forward. What we'd like all the veterans to do, and if you've been here before, you know what to do, fall in behind them and start coming forward. We want everybody up here to turn around facing the crowd. We want to recognize all of our veterans. So this will be the Letters from War.
She walked to the mailbox on that bright summer's day. Found a letter from her son in a war far away.
United States Air Force, United States Marines, United States Coast Guard. All of them today here, you want to come back out and have a seat?
Tim, I'd like to say they also served who stayed at home and waited.
Very well done. Also, the United States Merchant Marine from the Second World War. Very special.
A little bit longer.
While everyone's having the seat, I'd like to introduce a person. He said when I asked him to come up forward because I knew he was a veteran, he said it's not about me. I said, well, it is about you. But he's from the Sheriff's Department, representing the Sheriff's Department today for us. So we would have a presence here. He's also newly promoted Captain David Bark. Uniformed Services, is that correct? Yep. And as we were talking about, he puts up with Jamie West, so that should make him a general. So anyway, we're glad you're here. Thank you. Appreciate the service. The next story is from D-Day on France in 1944, and I heard this story about 15 years ago, and I wanted to make sure I had my memory correct, and I called a friend, Jimmy Price, last night, who introduced me to this veteran. We were out in Bedford County doing a living history, and Jimmy's uncle, Robert Price, was a member of the 29th Division, landed on D-Day, as well as Bobby Sales. So this is Bobby's Sales story. Bobby just passed away this year. He was a keynote speaker at the D-Day Memorial in Bedford. But Bobby's story is interesting. He was in Company B of the 29th Division, 116th Infantry, 29th Division, that landed on D-Day. Bobby came in on the second wave, so they came in between 6:30 and 7 a.m. that morning. Bobby was a radio operator for their particular group. He followed the captain around, carried the radio, and as they were going in, when they got ready to drop the ramp, a German mortar round hit and bounced the landing craft up. Of course, they were landing on Omaha and took tremendous casualties. And so he kind of dove off of the landing craft as the ramp dropped off to the side because of that mortar round bouncing the landing craft around. And he was carrying the radio, and he had his assault vest on, and because of all that weight, he went straight to the bottom. And he always said to that day, he never knew who cut the vest off, but somebody cut his assault vest off, and he dumped the radio because the captain he was carrying it for had already been killed by machine gun fire hitting the landing craft. He said he worked his way into those, you've seen those barricades in the photographs that were on the beach. He got up to one of those, and the sergeant of his unit had already been hit, and he was laying ahead of me, and he turned around and looked back, and he said, Bobby, I've been hit. And he said he got hit a second time and was killed. So Bobby was behind this structure watching all this going on. And a German sniper was on top of one of the pillboxes, picking out individuals, any movement that was on the beach that the main pillbox guns weren't getting. Bobby said, I stayed behind that barricade and didn't get up to the wall until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So he went into the beach and spent 5 hours in the water behind that cross thing until they were able to clear enough of the beach for them to be able to move up to the wall. Bobby's a tremendous, he's part of that citizen army that we've always been very proud of here in this country, and his story is certainly unique. At this time, we'd like to present our wreaths. We have two organizations presenting the wreaths. We have the Disabled American Veterans, Chapter 13. Commander Larry Comley is also a Coast Guard veteran. And some of these gentlemen wear more than one hat. You'll see all the stuff on their hats where they're also DAV, they're also VFW. They do a lot of good at a lot of the veterans organizations.
And salute. Two.
Our second wreath is being placed by Comte de Grasse chapter United Daughters of the American Revolution, and they will be bringing that up, and I believe that's the Yorktown chapter. So they, if you've ever been in there, they run the Customs House just down the road, and if you haven't been in there, you need to get there. It's a beautiful building with a lot to see inside. If everyone please stand. Present arms. Everyone can be seated. We can't do our rifle salute, obviously. Well, actually, we were going to, and the county said no. Takes too much repair work on the building afterwards. Our next story is from Korea. A Marine Corps veteran told me this story. He was from Roanoke, Virginia, was in a Marine Reserve unit, and got called back up. He was a World War II veteran, got called back up for the Korean War. So he was attached to the 1st Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division, and of course they were at Chosin Reservoir. If you don't know much about it, it was a situation where the Americans were north of what we know now as the DMZ, were cut off and surrounded by thousands and thousands of Chinese troops that were sent down. And Chesty Puller, a Virginian, was the officer of that particular regiment, and he's one of the initial guys that helped get those guys, fought their way back out of encirclement to the greatest, they say, the greatest evacuation for the American Army in history, for getting everybody out. But this fellow, he said, what was interesting, he said, here we were in this terrible location, in this terrible situation. We didn't know if we were going to get out or not. It was freezing. Things were so bad, he said, when we were losing troops, we would take the casualties, the bodies, and place them on the hoods of the vehicles because we were going to bring everybody out with us. He said, with all this going on, he said, I was sitting in this Chesty Puller. He said, this guy's got all this weight on his shoulders and everything to deal with. Came over and sat down next to me. He said, I understand you're from Virginia. He said, yes, sir, I am. He said, wouldn't you just love to be fishing on the bay right now? He said, so those, again, those personal stories, those times of strife when the American will and American sense of humor seems to overcome all of that, makes a big difference. Then I'll go into our next story, and it's Iwo Jima. This was a Navy veteran. Many of the men that went in and ran landing craft and such during the World War II were men that were from the coastal areas of the West Coast and East Coast of the United States, and they already had some boating experience. And this fellow we were hauling a boat for told me the story. He and another fellow ran landing craft personnel, and he said, we were landing Marines on Iwo Jima. We were taking in the second to third wave of the guys. And he said, what you would do is, once you loaded up, there were two of us on there, and he said, I was a bosun's mate, and you would circle until everybody was ready, and he said, then you'd go in, all the landing craft would go in together to lower that wave. He said, so we were circling, and he said, and I don't remember which unit he was taking in, but it was, of course, Marines. And he said, we were circling, and I noticed something didn't look right on the ramp, so I walked forward, walked my way through the Marines forward, and they were sitting down because it was so bumpy. They were sitting down in the landing craft to cut down on the spray coming over it, and I stepped on one of the Marines' hands, and he came up and he decked me. He knocked me out. He said, he knocked me out, and he said, about the time I came to, the Marines were trying to get me back to my station, and the guy was apologizing. He said, that's how tense this whole situation was because he knew going into the beach things were so bad. But he said, I'll never forget, he said, the Marine knocked me out and then apologized for doing it. At this time, we'd like to retire the colors. We'd ask our VFW and our ROTC and our DAV. Everyone please stand. Everyone please be seated. Our last stories, we actually have two stories. I'm going to tell a quick one, and then I'm going to turn it over for a fellow, a friend of this county, and certainly a friend of all of us, to tell his own story. And I first saw his story on the History Channel, so I asked him if he would give it today. The first story is a fellow that I did living history with. Ralph Preston was a Marine Corps veteran of Vietnam. Did 2 tours over there. His second tour, he was in charge of 6 men that stole things from the other uniformed services because the Marines would usually get the least. He said, my guys, I don't know what they're doing now, but my guys are very good at it. So he said, anyway, he said, over on the runways, he said, our Marine aviators, which he was attached to, he said, we didn't have enough generators. He said, we could barely scratch one together for each plane. He said, the Air Force, on the other hand, had multiple generators. He said, they had plenty of equipment and all, so we set up to steal one of their generators off the runway. And we did it over next to a little area they called Dog Patch, which was next to the end of the runway. And Dog Patch was a village, Vietnamese civilian village built out of flattened beer cans. He said, so that's how they shingled their buildings. He said, so we had set up, we took the generator, pulled onto the Marine base, and had it set up in the shop to paint Marine Corps colors, and we put fake Marine Corps numbers on it. Well, the APs knew they'd stolen it and followed them to the Marine base, went in to complain to the officer in charge of the base that they'd stolen their generator. The Marine officer said, I don't know anything about it. He said, if you don't get off my base, I'm going to throw you in the brig. So the Air Force guys left. That's the first part of the story. About 2 or 3 months later, we had a workboat come down from New York, Long Island area, and we were going to put it on the railway and haul it. And it turns out we couldn't haul it, it drew too much water, but we sat under the tree and talked to the captain, and the captain, having just heard that story, I started talking about this Marine friend of mine whose job it was to steal things from other services. He said, you know something? He said, those son of a gun stole one of our generators one time off the runway. And I said, where? He said, we were next to this little village we called Dog Patch, and it was the same story, and it was their generator. He said, we chased them to the base. We knew they had the generator, and they had already painted it, and he threatened to throw our APs in the brig. And I said, it's the same story. What are the chances of hearing both ends of the same story that close together? He said, I would really like to meet that guy and shake his hand, although I'm still upset about it because... Now I'd like to introduce you to Bill Townsley. Bill's been up here. He's been helping organize the placing of the wreath and the color guard with the VFW and DAV, and I'm going to let him tell his story. Bill?
It's not about me, but it's always fun to tell my story. If you want to read the long version, you can Google covey, as in a covey of birds, covey, space 264, not 246, but 264, and you can read all about it. The quick version. I arrive in Da Nang on the 1st of January, 1969. I start flying missions on the 11th of January, and on the 18th of January, I'm shot down in Laos. I have an instructor, because he's still teaching me, because I'm brand new over there, with me. They got him out the first day. They didn't get me out the first day because the shoppers kept getting shot up and so forth and so on. But if you want to know what it's like, I can tell you it's like sitting in a secretary's chair and just spinning around when your airplane's. That's what I remember the thought about as we're going down, and I looked at my cockpit mate there. He was a major and I was a second lieutenant, and I nudged him and he went out. And when he went out, he hit his head on the strut of the airplane. I think. I mean, that's what we presume. And then I dove out shortly thereafter, pulled my ripcord. As I'm looking down, I see his chute go whoop, boom, like that. So he had fallen probably about 1,500, 2,000 feet before he woke up just in time to pull his chute. So anyway, he was on the ground. He landed about 15 feet to the left of the wreckage. I landed about 15 feet to the right of the wreckage. So he got about 150 yards further than I did because it took me a long time coming down. The bad guys were shooting at me, so forth and so on. When I landed, I just ditched my chute and I ran off, and I got about 50 yards away from the airplane and I found a bush, and that's where I stayed for the duration of my time there. A lot of things happened that day. They worked and worked to get him out. They used 2 helicopters to try and get him out. Both of them were shot up. The second one got close to me, but then it got shot up by the bad guys also. So they decided that they had to leave me, and they left me for the night. A lot of things happened during the night. 2 bad guys walked 2 feet away from me during the night. They just didn't see me, but thank you. Some kind of creature was wanting to make a nest, so that creature kept coming up to my hair and pulling my hair. And every time I jerked, he'd rustle off, and that'd make too much noise for me. I just, you don't want noise when you're in a situation like that. You don't want any noise. So I let that creature, whatever it was, male or female, rodent, just have all the hair he wanted, and that's why I'm bald now. So. And he came back 3 or 4 times that night, so he or she. Anyway, point is, in the morning, the good guys came in to wake me up, and I did get a little bit of sleep, but not too much. But it was early morning, and I'm in the middle of the jungle, and they decided I told them a lot of things happened. We found a factory, the truck park, the encampment, and let's see, and a factory, and the gun that shot us down. So anyway, I told them all about all this stuff that I'd figured out where it was in the night with my compass and whatnot. And I told the good guys where all this stuff was, and they decided that they needed to drop a lot of bombs around. As the morning wore on, I'm laying there counting the bombs and so forth and so on, and just listening to the music of it, trying to get me out of there. And they started to fire a rocket, and the rocket hit I feel like it hit right over there where that Captain Kerr is there, kind of thing, Deputy Kerr, and it whooshed over the top of me. And I told them to stop, stop, stop. You guys almost hit me. And so they stopped and they said, well, we got to figure out where you are, because we thought you were, we thought we knew where you are, but now you're not where we think you were. And I said, well, I'm down here in the middle of the jungle. Well, as the morning, the sunlight was coming up over here, and the only place I could see out into the sky was right over in this area over here, and I could see the planes fly by every once in a while, and the sun was coming in over here. And I had a mirror, and this mirror I've kept. I'm sorry, I kept it because it saved my life. I decided that if I could just get the sun to bounce off of the mirror and onto the trees up there, I might get their attention. And I did. And it was very dicey for a minute. They said, "Are you shooting? Are you here and shooting? Or what's going on down there? Somebody's shooting at us." And I said, "No, they're not shooting. That's me with my mirror." Okay. So then they decided that they had a good lock on me, and they had to work another couple of hours around. And then when they came in, they had to gas. They gassed the whole area with tear gas. And I had been in the Marines before I joined the Air Force, so I knew what tear gas was all about. And it didn't bother me other than to clear my sinuses and make me cry. And that's what I'm reliving right now. No, but anyway, the point is that they threw the tear gas down, and the helicopter came in finally and had a rope down, but as it got close, the helicopter started going off, and I wondered, but I had to chase it, so I chased it. And I'm running through the jungle now, and I ran right past where the airplane crashed, where I'd been, and I finally caught a hold of the rope, or the seat, if you will, opened it up, and I'm just sitting on it. Well, having dragged through the jungle like that, that thing got wound up tight on a drum. So as I'm going up, I'm sitting on this seat, and I'm spinning just as fast as I can with my pistol, looking for any bad guys to pop out. But anyway, I got inside and found out that everybody inside the helicopter was crying also, because when they were hovering, they woofed the gas into the helicopter. So the pilot was just crying away, and I'm looking at everybody, and finally they got me out. But it took about 24 hours to get me out. Actually, only about 22 and a half hours. And my boss told me, "Well, if it had been 24, you'd go home." I said, "Well, I'm not going back." Anyway, I started flying again about 10 days later. I'd hurt my leg in the process. But anyway, 10 days later, I started flying again, and I ended up flying 466 sorties, 900 hours of combat time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. That was great. I asked Bill the other day if he would do that, and he said, "Well," and because it's a great story. One of the things I think if you have the time to do it, we have veterans here, but everybody has veterans in their lives. Talk to them, hear the stories, learn the stories, both the good and the bad, because that really gives you the story of America and everything we've been through as a nation to get to where we are today. We'd like to thank our veterans again for being here. We've got a little piece I'd like to read that is often read, and it's well written. It was written by Charles Province, and a couple of other people have been given credit for it, not that they've claimed credit, but Charles Province wrote this, and it's called "It is the Soldier." It is the soldier, not the minister, who's given us freedom of religion. It is the soldier, not the reporter, who's given us freedom of the press. It is the soldier, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. It is the soldier, not the campus organizer, who has given us freedom to protest. It is the soldier, not the lawyer, who has given us the right to fair trial. It is the soldier, not the politician, who has given us the right to vote. It is the soldier who salutes the flag, who serves beneath the flag, and whose coffin is draped by the flag, and who allows protesters to burn the flag. Thank you for coming out and joining us for Veterans Day. We don't have any official end other than thanking you. Please stand up and let's have another hand for our vets. Everyone stand. We'd like to thank Our York High NJROTC, that comes out each year and supports us for this. The Sheriff's Department, York County, the York County Historical Committee, VFW Post 824, DAV Chapter 13, the Comte de Grasse chapter of the American Daughters of the American Revolution, Seth, who's in back doing our sound, and Rick, who helped organize this for the county, and all of you veterans. We'd like to thank all of you for coming out and supporting us this weekend. Thank you very much.